Hello again, everyone. I am coming to you from my backyard again. I know I came to you guys from my backyard last week, maybe the week before, but I thought it'd be fun to do it again since we're having such great weather. Um, I've got my umbrella up, as if any of you guys have seen me out at Driveline, I use my umbrella because I get burned super fast and super easily. So I'm keeping cover, and I hope you guys are enjoying all the sunshine and kind of the extra time to spend outside during this time before it gets super hot here. So we're back with The Hobbit again. Last time we were together, I started chapter 6, and we got about halfway. So I think the last time that we had met, Bilbo and Thorin and the company were being chased by wolves, and they were actually running up some trees. So that's kind of where we left him. I think it was a little bit of a cliffhanger when I left. And I've got a friend over here. This is not my dog, but it looks like it's the neighbor's dog, and I seem to have upset him. Maybe he's not a Hobbit fan. So we'll see. If you hear any noises, it's my kids or it's the neighbor's dogs. You know, it happens where there's bugs. It's Phoenix in April. All right, so we got a little bit of a short recap. And now I'm going to open up, and I will go about a paragraph back so that we know where we're at, and then we will go from there. So at this point, Dory has pulled Bilbo up because he was even too short to reach the lowest tree branch. Just at that moment, the wolves trotted along, howling at the clearing. All of a sudden, there were hundreds of eyes looking at them. Still, Dory did not let Bilbo down. He waited till he had clambered off his shoulders onto the branches, and then he jumped for the branches himself, only just in time. A wolf snapped at his cloak as he swung up and nearly got him. In a minute, there was a whole pack of them yelping around the tree, leaping at the trunk, with eyes blazing and tongues hanging out. And like I said, I've got a friend over here, and he's apparently going to act like we're wolf friends for right now, so that's a little apropos. But even the wild wargs, for the evil wolves over the edge of the wild, were named that. So they're called wargs. It's spelled W-A-R-G-S. So they're kind of like wolves, but they're a lot bigger. I always thought of them kind of like dire wolves, like a lot bigger, but they're still wolves. So the wargs cannot climb trees. For the time, they were very safe. And luckily, it was warm and not windy. Trees are not very comfortable to sit in for long at any time, but in the cold and the wind with wolves all around waiting for you, they could be perfectly miserable places. This glade in the ring of trees was evidently a meeting place for the wolves. More and more kept coming in. They left guards at the foot of the tree in which Dory and Bilbo were at, and then went snuffing about until they had smelt every tree that had anyone in it. These they guarded too, while all the rest, hundreds and hundreds it seemed, went and sat in a great circle in the glade. And in the middle of the circle was a great gray wolf. He spoke to them in the dreadful language of the wargs. Gandalf understood it, Bilbo did not, but it sounded terrible to him, as if all their talk was about cruel and wicked things. As it was. Every now and then the wargs would circle around their great chief, and their dreadful clamor almost made the hobbit fall out of his pine tree. I will tell you what Gandalf heard, though Bilbo did not understand it. The wargs and the goblins often helped one another with their wicked deeds. Goblins do not usually venture far from the mountains unless they are driven out and are looking for new homes, or marching to war, which I am glad to say has not happened for a long while. But in those days, they sometimes used to go on raids, especially to get food or slaves to work with. Then they often got wargs to help them and share plunders with them. Sometimes they rode on wolves like men do on horses. I don't know if any of you guys have seen the movie, The Hobbit, but this is actually what happens in the movie is you see a bunch of orcs actually that are riding wargs. So it's slightly different, but they do use them like, you know, as large, like basically horse-like creatures. Now it seemed a great goblin raid had been planned for that very night. The wargs had come to meet the goblins, and the goblins were late. The reason, no doubt, was the death of the great goblin, and all the excitement caused by the dwarves and Bilbo and the wizard, for whom they were probably still hunting. In spite of the dangers for this far land, bold men had of late been making their way back into the south, cutting down trees, building themselves places to live among the more pleasant woods of the valley and along the river shores. There were many of them, and they were brave and well armed, and even the wargs did not dare attack them. if there were many together or on a bright day. But now they had planned with the goblins to help come by night upon some of the villages nearest the mountains. If their plan had been carried out... Oh, we better wait a second. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but I've got a jet going right over. I live right by Luke Air Force Base. I don't know where a lot of you guys live, but sometimes they get pretty loud. So let me go back and reread that sentence. We've got all sorts of distractions today, don't we? If their plan had been carried out, there would have been none left the next day. All would have been killed except a few goblins that had kept from the wolves and carried back as prisoners to their caves. This was dreadful talk to listen to, not only because the brave woodsmen and their wives and children, but also because of the dangers which now threatened Gandalf and his friends. The wargs were angry and puzzled at finding them here in their meeting place. They thought they were friends of the woodsmen, come to spy on them, and would take down of their plans to the valley, and then the goblins and the wolves would have to fight in a terrible battle instead of just capturing prisoners and devouring people, waked suddenly in their sleep. So the wargs had no intention of going away and letting their people up in the tree escape, at any rate, not until morning. And long before that, they said, goblin soldiers would come down from the mountains, and goblins can climb trees, or they can cut them down. Now you can understand why Gandalf, listening to their growling and yelping, began to be dreadfully afraid, wizard as he was, as to feel that they were in a very bad place, and had not yet escaped at all. All the same, he was not going to let them have their own way, though he could not do very much stuck up in a tree with wolves all around on the ground below. He gathered the huge pine cones from the branches of the tree, and he set one alight with a bright blue flame, and struck it whizzing down among the circle of the wolves. It struck one on the back, and immediately his shaggy coat caught on fire, and he was leaping to and fro horribly. I've got another jet going over. This isn't working out very well, is it? Oh well. I figure if we were at school and I was reading this to you guys, there would probably be interruptions anyways, so it's kind of like being in class, isn't it? Then another came, and another, one in blue flames, one in red, another in green. They burst on the ground in the middle of the circle and went off in colored sparks and smoke. Especially large one hit the chief wolf on the nose, and he leaped in the air 10 feet and then rushed round the circle, biting and snapping, even at the other wolves, in anger and fright. The dwarves and Bilbo shouted and cheered. The rage of the wolves was terrible to see, and the commotion they made filled all the forest. Wolves are afraid of fire at all times, but this was the most horrible and uncanny fire. If a spark got on their coat, it stuck and burned into them, and unless they rolled over, soon they were all in flames. Very soon, all about the glade, wolves were rolling over and over to put out the sparks in their back, while those that were burning were running about, howling and setting others alight, till their own friends chased them away, and they fled down the slopes, crying and yammering, looking for water. "What is all this uproar in the forest tonight?" said the Lord of the Eagles. He was sitting, black in the moonlight, on top of a lonely pinnacle of rock at the eastern edge of the mountains. "I hear Wolf's voice. Are the goblins at mischief in the woods?" He swept up into the air, and immediately 2 of his guards from the rocks at either hand leapt up to follow him. They circled around the sky, looking down at the ring of wargs, a tiny spot far in the distance. But eagles have keen eyes and see small things at a great distance. The Lord of the Eagles of the Misty Mountains had eyes that he could look at the sun unblinking, and he could see a rabbit moving on the ground a mile below, even in the moonlight. So though he could not see the people in the trees, he could make out the commotion of the wolves and see the tiny flashes of fire and hear the howling and yelping that came up faint far beneath him. He also could see the glint of the moon on the goblin spears and the helmets, as the long lines of the wicked folk crept down the hillside from their gate and wound into the woods. Some of you guys might remember the great eagles at the end of Lord of the Rings that came and helped Frodo, and they also helped Gandalf escape when Sauron had him. These are the same great eagles. Eagles are not kindly birds. Some are cowardly and cruel, but the ancient race of the northern mountains were all the greatest of all the birds. They were proud and strong and noble-hearted. They did not love goblins or fear them. When they took notice of them, which was seldom, for they did not eat such creatures, they swooped on them, drove them shrieking back to their caves, and stopped whatever wickedness they were doing. The goblins hated the eagles and feared them, but could not reach their lofty seats or drive them from the mountain. Tonight, the Lord of the Eagles was filled with curiosity as to what was afoot. He summoned many other eagles around him, and they flew away from the mountain, and slowly circling round and round they came, down, 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 towards the ring of the wolves and the meeting place of the goblins. A very good thing to do. Dreadful things had been going on down there. The wolves that had caught fire and fled into the forest had set alight in several places. It was high summer, and on this eastern side of the mountain there was little for rain. Had been little rain for some time. Yellowing bracken, fallen trees, deep piled pine needles, here and there dead trees, were soon all in flames. All round the clearing of the wargs, fire was leaping. The wolf guards did not leave the trees. Maddened and angry, they were leaping and howling around the trunks, cursing the dwarves in their horrible language, with their tongues hanging out and their eyes shining as fierce and as red as flames. Then suddenly goblins came running out yelling. They thought a battle with the woodsman was going on, but they soon learned what had really happened. Some of them actually sat down and laughed. Others waved their spears and clashed their shafts against their shields. Goblins are not afraid of fire, and as soon they had a plan that seemed to them most amusing. Some got all the wolves together in a pack. Some stacked fern and brushwood around the tree trunks. Others rushed around and stamped and beat and stamped until nearly all the flames were put out. But they did not put out the fire nearest to the trees where the dwarves were. That fire they fed with leaves and dead branches and bracken. Soon they had a ring of smoke and flame all around the dwarves, a ring which they kept from spreading outwards, but closed slowly inwards until the running fire was licking the fuel piled under the trees. Smoke was in Bilbo's eyes. He could feel the heat of the flames, and through the reek he could see the goblins dancing around like a circle of people round a midsummer's bonfire. Outside the ring, dancing warriors with spears and axes stood on the wolves at a respectful distance. Outside the ring of the dancing warriors with spears and axes stood the wolves at a respectable distance, watching and waiting. He could hear the goblins begin to sing a terrible song. 15 birds in 5 fir trees. Their feathers were fanned in a fiery breeze. But funny little birds, they had no wings. Oh, what shall we do with the funny little things? Roast them alive or stew them in a pot, fry them, boil them, and eat them hot? Then they stopped and shouted, "Fly away, little birds, fly away if you can. Come down, little birds, or you will get roasted in your nests. Sing, sing, little birds, why don't you sing?" "Go away, little boys," shouted Gandalf in answer. "It isn't bird nesting time. Also, naughty little boys that play with fire get punished." He said it to make them angry and to show them he was not frightened, though of course he was. Wizard though he was. But they took no notice, and they went on singing. "Burn, burn, tree and fern, shrivel and scorch a fizzing torch, to light the night for our delight, yeah, hey. Bake and toast 'em, fry 'em, roast 'em, till beards blaze and eyes glaze, till hair smells and skin cracks, fat melts and bones black. In cinders lie beneath the sky, so the dwarves shall die, and light the night for our delight, yea, hey, hooray, yahoy." And with that yahoy, the flames were under Gandalf's tree. In a moment it spread to the others. The bark caught fire, and the lower branches cracked. Then Gandalf climbed to the top of his tree. The sudden splendor flashed from his wand like lightning, and he got ready to spring down on the high right among the spears of the goblins. That would have been the end of him, though. He probably would have killed many of them as he came hurtling down like a thunderbolt, but he never leapt. Just at that moment, the Lord of the Eagles swept down from above, seized him in his talons, and he was gone. There was a howl of anger and a surprise from the goblins. "Loud," cried the Lord of the Eagles, to whom Gandalf had now spoken. Back swept the great birds that were with him, and down they came like huge black shadows. The wolves yammered and gnashed their teeth, and the goblins yelled and stamped with rage, and flung their heavy spears in the air in vain. Over them swooped the eagles. The dark rush of their beating wings smote them to the floor or drove them far away. Their talons tore at the goblins' faces. Other birds flew to the treetops and seized the dwarves, who were scrambling now far as they had ever dared to go. Poor little Bilbo was nearly left behind again. He had just managed to catch hold of Dory's leg as Dory was borne off of the last of all. And up they went above the tumult, above the burning, Bilbo swinging in the air, with his arms nearly breaking. Now far below, the goblins and the wolves were scattering far and wide in the woods. A few eagles were still circling above the sweeping above the battleground. The flames about the tree sprang suddenly above the highest branches. They went up in a crackling fire. There was a sudden flurry of sparks and smoke. Bilbo had escaped only just in time. Soon the light of the burning was faint below, a red twinkle on the black floor, and they were high above the sky, rising all the time in the strong sweeping circles. Bilbo never forgot that flight. Clinging to Dory's ankle, he moaned, my arms, but Dory groaned, my poor leg, my poor legs. At the best of times, height made Bilbo giddy. He used to turn queer as if he had looked over the edge of quite a little cliff, and had never liked ladders, let alone trees, never having had to escape from wolves before. So you can imagine how his head swam now, when he looked down beneath his dangling toes and saw the dark lands opening wide beneath him, touched here and there with the light of the moon on the hillside rock or a stream in the plains. The pale peaks of the mountains were coming nearer, moonlit spikes of rock sticking out of black shadows. Summer or not, it seemed very cold. He shut his eyes and wondered if he could hold on any longer. He imagined what would happen if he did not. He felt sick. The flight ended only just in time for him, just before his arms gave way. He loosed Dory's ankle and with a gasp fell to the rough platform of the Eagle's eyrie. There he lay without speaking, and his thoughts were a mixture of surprise at being saved from the fire and fear lest he fall off that narrow place into the deep shadows on either side. He was feeling very queer indeed in his head by the time after the dreadful adventure of the last 3 days with next to nothing to eat, and he found himself saying out loud, now I know what a piece of bacon feels like when it's suddenly picked up out of the pan on a fork and put back on the shelf. Oh, no, you don't, said Dory, answering, because the bacon knows that it'll get back to the pan sooner or later, and it is to be hoped that we shan't. Also, eagles aren't forks. Oh, no, not a bit like storks' forks, I mean, said Bilbo, sitting up, looking anxiously at the eagle who was perched close by. He wondered what other nonsense he had been saying and if the eagle would think it was rude. You ought not to be rude to an eagle when you are only the size of a hobbit and you are up in its eyrie at night. The eagles only sharpened its beak on stone and trimmed its feathers and took no notice. So here's a little picture that they have in here. It's titled The Misty Mountains Looking West from the Eyrie Towards the Goblin Gate. So they're on top of where the eagles live and they're looking towards the Goblin's Gate, which I don't really see it, so it's kind of just an interpretation. They're looking back at the Misty Mountains because they're going more east and the Misty Mountains are westward to them. Soon another eagle flew up. The Lord of the Eagle bids you to bring your prisoners to the great shelf, he cried, and was off again. The others seized Dory in his claw and flew away with him in the night, leaving Bilbo all alone. He had just strength to wonder what the messenger had meant by prisoners when he began to think of being torn up for supper like Rabbit when his own turn came. The eagle came back, seized him by his talons in the back of his coat, and swooped off. This time he had only flown a short way. Very soon Bilbo was laid down, trembling with fear, on a wide shelf of rock in the mountainside. There was no path down on it to save by flying, and no path down off of it except by jumping over a precipice. There he found all the others sitting with their backs to the mountain wall. The Lord of the Eagles was also there, and was speaking with Gandalf. It seemed that Bilbo was not going to be eaten after all. The wizard and the Eagle Lord appeared to know each other slightly, and even be on friendly terms. As a matter of fact, Gandalf, who had often been in the mountains, had once rendered a service to the eagles and healed their lord from an arrow wound. So you see, prisoners had meant prisoners rescued from the goblins only, and not captives of the eagles. As Bilbo listened to the talk of Gandalf, he realized at last that they were going to escape really and truly from the dreadful mountains. He was discussing plans with the great eagle for carrying the dwarves and himself and Bilbo far away and setting them down on their journey across the plains below. The Lord of the Eagles would not take them anywhere near where men lived. They will shoot at us and their great bows of yew, he said, for they would think that we were after their sheep. And at other times they would be right. No, we are glad to cheat the goblins out of their sport and glad to repay our thanks to you, but we will not risk ourselves for dwarves in the southward plains. Very well, said Gandalf. Take us where and as far as you will. We are already deeply obliged to you, but in the meantime we are famished with hunger. I am nearly dead with it, Bilbo said in a weak voice that nobody heard. That can perhaps be mended, said the Lord of the Eagles. Later on, you might have seen a bright fire on the shelf of rocks and figures of the dwarves round it, cooking and making a fine roasting smell. The eagles had brought up dry boughs for the fuel, and had brought rabbits, hares, and small sheep. The dwarves managed all the preparation. Bilbo was too weak to help, and anyway, he was not much use at skinning rabbits or cutting up meat, being used to having it delivered by the butcher all ready to cook. Gandalf, too, was lying down after doing his part and setting the fire going. Since Oin and Gloin had lost their tinderboxes, dwarves never have taken to matches, not yet. So ended the adventure of the Misty Mountains. Soon Bilbo's stomach was feeling full and comfortable again, and he felt he could sleep contently, though he really would have just liked a loaf and butter better than bits of meat tossed on sticks. He curled up on the hard rock more soundly than he had ever done on his feather bed in his own little hole at home. But all night he dreamed of his house, and wandering in his sleep into all of his different rooms, looking for something that he could not find, nor remember where it looked at. Alright, so I just finished chapter 6, so we are actually going to stop there. I'm only at about 20 minutes, but the next chapter is still actually quite a bit longer, so I'm only going to get a few pages into it before we're going to hit our 30-minute mark. And the last 2 videos I made were pretty long. So we're going to start at this one, the next chapter. The title of it is Queer Lodgings. Now that in itself is kind of an odd title, in this sense is that you have to remember this book was written in 1930. In the 30s, the 40s, somewhere around there, and queer meant odd in an odd sort of way. It's used in different terminology now, but that's what he means when he uses it. It was a very common term at the time. So our company has left the Misty Mountains. They are done with that portion of their journey, but they still have a very long way to go. I will see if I can look in the back. I did find I do have a map in my book, but it's just at the end. So if we can see here just slightly, we are looking at, they just left. They're right there. So there's the Misty Mountains over there, and they're following this path right here. So they've just come down. So, and they're heading all the way up there to the Lonely Mountain. So we still have quite a bit to go. And I'll post on the comments the map of Middle-earth. Let me you guys know if you guys like that. I actually really like looking at that because not only does it show the Hobbit's path, it shows the path that the Fellowship and many of them take from Lord of the Rings, which is similar. So like if you guys know Lord of the Rings, they go to Mordor, which is actually in the south, and we're going to head up to the Lonely Mountain, which is in the north. So they go through some of the same places, but not totally, which is kind of fun because then you get to see this whole expanse of Middle-earth. So I hope you guys enjoyed this section, the rest of chapter 6. The next time I see you guys, we will start on chapter 7. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I'll see you later.